Let me ask you something. Do you actually hate working, or do you just hate what your job is costing you? Because those are two totally different things. Maybe you don't mind working hard. Maybe you've been working hard your entire life as an adult. You show up, you handle responsibilities, you pay your bills, you do what you're supposed to do, but somewhere along the way you started realizing that the paycheck wasn't the only thing being exchanged. You were also exchanging your time, your energy, your peace, your flexibility, and God forbid, sometimes, yes, even your health, and maybe even the freedom to decide what you want your own life to look like. And if you're over 50, especially if you're doing life on your own in a solo season, that realization can hit a little differently because suddenly time feels a whole lot more valuable than it did when you were 25. At least that's what I found. I don't want to spend the next 10 or 15 years waiting for Friday. I don't want to spend, 5 days of my week, recovering, from the weekend. And I definitely don't want to spend the majority of my waking hours doing something I don't particularly enjoy just because somebody deposits money into my bank account every 2 weeks. Now, don't misunderstand where I'm coming from. I'm not telling anybody to walk into work tomorrow, throw their badge across the desk and be like, you know what, Z told me to quit my job. No, sir, don't you put that on me. But we have bills. We have responsibilities. And this is exactly why this conversation matters so much because for most of us, for many of us, the problem isn't that we don't want to leave. The problem is that we financially don't feel like we can. Another different story, right? Sometimes we talk about being trapped in a job as though it only happens to people who are underpaid. And that's not true. Sometimes you're making decent money. I was. You've got benefits. I did. Maybe you've accumulated vacation time. Yep, had that too. Maybe there's a retirement plan. Maybe you've built seniority. Okay. And from the outside, everybody thinks you got a good thing going on. But deep down, if you're being honest with yourself, excuse my zoo, you're miserable. And then somebody tells you, girl, you better stay right there. You got a good job. Have you ever noticed how often people call something a good job without ever asking whether or not that good job is yielding you a good life? Those are not necessarily the same thing either. Because if you're waking up every morning with dread, if you're counting down the years until retirement, if you're constantly exhausted, if you can't take time off when you need it, if you're sitting at your desk daydreaming about doing something completely different and being somewhere else, at some point you've got to ask, what is this paycheck actually costing me? And that was a question that I eventually had to ask myself. I had a government career. There were good benefits. There were supposed to be security. Okay. There was a path I was supposed to follow. You stay long enough, you keep collecting the paycheck, you keep building towards your retirement, and eventually, one day, I'd finally get to have my time. But I started thinking, why does freedom always seem to be scheduled for later? Like, why is peace something we're supposed to earn after we've given away decades of our lives? And what happens if later doesn't turn out the way we planned it? Think about the traditional formula most of us were given. You get educated, you get a skill, you get a job, you work hard, you save, contribute to that retirement, girl, stay employed, and eventually you'll be able to retire. That's been the blueprint many of us have inherited over decades. And I'm not saying that the blueprint never worked. I'm saying that the world has changed. Jobs changed. Technology has definitely changed. The cost of living, I don't need to go there. You know it's changed. Retirement's changed. And the amount of control that companies have over their employees, that has also changed. But somehow we're still expected to follow the same financial instructions that were put out 60, 70 years ago. And here's the part that really bothered me. If your entire lifestyle depends on one paycheck, then ultimately whoever controls that paycheck has an enormous amount of influence and control over your life. So I want you to think about that. Whether you can pay your mortgage, whether you can travel, whether you can take care of an emergency, whether you can help your children or grandchildren, whether you can leave a toxic workplace, whether you can relocate, whether you can take 3 months and figure out what it is exactly you want to do next. All of it can come back to one thing. Will that paycheck keep coming? That's a lot of power to hand over to someone else concerning your life. If you're married or partnered and there are 2 incomes coming into the household, losing one income can still be quite devastating. But, there may be another paycheck temporarily keeping the lights on. When you're in your solo season, however, honey, you are plan A, and sometimes you're plan B, C, and D too. Why? Because there's nobody else's paycheck quietly arriving in the background to hold you up in the event of something happening. That changes the conversation. It means financial independence isn't some cute little motivational phrase. It becomes practical. It becomes protection. It becomes peace of mind. And this is one reason I became so interested in building and learning how to build income for myself online. Not because I believe that the internet is some sort of magical ATM. It is not. Not because somebody told me I could push 3 buttons and wake up rich. Please. If that existed, we'd all be pushing them 3 buttons. Like what is the little experiment they have with science where they have the rats and, you have food or you give them, alcohol and they just keep hitting the alcohol button. Yeah. I became interested because I started asking a different type of question. What was that question? What could I build that I could control? Something that doesn't require me to be in one physical location. Something that doesn't require another person to approve my vacation leave slip. Something that doesn't automatically stop because I'm no longer sitting in somebody's office. Something that could provide me with another option. That word became very important to me. Option. And this is where I think people get overwhelmed. They hear build online income and then they immediately think, well, I make $70,000 a year. How am I supposed to replace that? Who said you had to replace it all tomorrow? Nobody. What if the first goal was simply proving to yourself that you could create income outside of your current employer? What if you learned how the online economy actually worked? What if you developed skills that allowed you to earn beyond your job? What if you started building something while a paycheck was still coming in? Because that's a very different position from someone, waiting until something goes wrong. We insure our houses. We insure our cars. We even insure our health. But most people never think about insuring their income. And I'm not talking about buying an insurance policy. I'm talking about building another financial lane for you to walk down. Because one paycheck is not diversification. It is simply dependence. Period. I want you to imagine something. Not millions of dollars. Not a Lamborghini. Not some, internet fantasy. Something much simpler. Imagine having enough additional income coming in that you weren't terrified every time your company announced a meeting. And you know what kind of meeting I'm talking about. Don't play. Imagine knowing you could pay an unexpected bill without destroying your monthly budget. Imagine being able to take a trip without putting the whole thing on a credit card. Imagine your boss getting unreasonable, and instead of thinking, I have no choice, I have to take this, you could think, you know what? I need to decide whether this is still going to work for me. Do you feel the difference? That's what money can provide when it's used correctly. Not just stuff. Choice. And choice is one of the most underrated forms of freedom, I think. When I talk about building online income, I'm not just talking about money. I'm talking about location. I'm talking about time. I'm talking about being able to structure your day differently. I'm talking about potentially being able to live somewhere that gives you a better quality of life. I'm talking about waking up and knowing that the next chapter of your life isn't completely dependent on whether an employer still wants you or not. That is what interests me. Because I left the United States. I started over. And one of the biggest questions women have when they think about doing something similar is, but how would I support myself? And that is a very legitimate question. Freedom sounds, wonderful until the rents do. So we have to talk about both. We have to talk about the dream, and we have to talk about the financial infrastructure underneath the dream, right? So now if you've been listening to me for the last few minutes, you may be thinking, okay, Z, I understand why I need another income option, but what exactly are you talking about? How does somebody actually start building income online? Good. That's good. That's the question I want you to be asking, because there are a lot of ways to make money online. Some require inventory, some require clients, some require you to create products, some require specialized skills, some require an audience, and some use systems where much of the structure has already been created, and your job is learning how to operate the system and simply market it. That's the area that I became interested in, because I didn't want another job disguised as a business. I didn't want, something that chained me to a desk for another 8 hours a day. And I certainly didn't want to spend, the next 2 years trying to invent an entire business model from scratch. For what? I wanted to understand whether there was a system I could learn. And that's the part I want you to see for yourself. Now, I found something, and I did find that system. And that system has a blueprint, and we refer to it as the Freedom Blueprint. That's what I call it. And if this conversation has you thinking, okay, but show me what you're talking about, that's exactly what I want you to do next. The link is below the video in the description box, okay? I simply want you to enter your email address, and I'm going to send you this Freedom Blueprint absolutely free. It's going to walk you through the system, how it works, what it involves, and how it could potentially fit into the kind of life you're trying to create for yourself. I don't want you making a decision because I hype something up in a YouTube video. I want you to understand it thoroughly. Look at it, ask questions, and decide whether it makes sense to you, whether it makes sense for you, because this isn't about chasing some internet dream. It's about building another option for yourself. And you're in your solo season. If you are in your solo season, I believe having options should matter to you, right? That's the one thing that we need when we're doing life on our own. We need as many options as is humanly possible. Your job may be paying you, but that doesn't automatically mean it deserves control over your entire future, because it does not. And maybe the goal isn't to stop working. Maybe the goal is just to start building something that belongs to you. And that might be the first step toward a whole lot more freedom for yourself and your family if you have one. So if this spoke to you, I want you to subscribe to the channel. Stick around, because we're going to be talking more and more about these things. Starting over, what it really takes to build a life on your own terms, and how you can create online income for yourself. It is easier than you think. So I want you to comment my truth below, get the Freedom Blueprint, and I'm going to see you in the next video. And as I always tell you, ladies, HOAS, keep your head on a swivel. There is too much going on, particularly if you're in the US. Be aware of your surroundings at all times. When you're shopping, when you're picking up your kids, when you're hanging out with your friends, be aware of your surroundings. And as always, keep speaking your truth, and I will see you in the next one. Take care. Love you much. Bye.